The massive chamber stretched out like a dark ocean made of polished black stone. Ambassador Lee Daeho had seen many impressive buildings in his life, but nothing compared to the Galactic Council chamber. It was 3 kilometers wide and filled with the strangest collection of beings he could imagine. To his left sat a creature that looked like living crystal, its body catching and reflecting the soft blue lights that hung from the ceiling. The being never moved, never made a sound. It just sat there like a beautiful statue. To his right, a cloud of purple gas floated in a clear container, occasionally swirling in slow patterns. Daeho had been told this was how the Nethori looked, but it still felt weird to think of gas as a person. All around the chamber, hundreds of other aliens sat in perfect silence. Some had tentacles, others had wings, and a few looked like walking trees. But they all had one thing in common. None of them spoke out loud. Instead, they used machines called telepathic translators. These devices read their thoughts and feelings, cleaned them up, and then sent safe, polite messages to other delegates. Daeho tapped his fingers on his desk. The sound echoed in the quiet chamber, and several aliens turned to look at him. Their expressions were hard to read, but he got the feeling they were not happy. He tried to stop tapping, but his legs started bouncing instead. Back on Earth, fidgeting was normal. Here, it seemed to be some kind of crime. Captain Park Minji watched from the observation deck above. She was in charge of keeping the human delegation safe, and right now she was worried. The other species clearly did not like how humans acted. They expected everyone to sit still and silent, communicating only through their machines. But humans were not built that way. She had studied the files. On galactic politics before coming here, every species followed something called the Silence Protocol. It was an old rule that said all communication had to go through special filters. The idea was to prevent wars by making sure no one could say something offensive by accident. The system had worked for thousands of years, keeping peace between species that might otherwise fight. But watching Daeho fidget and mutter under his breath, Minji wondered if humans could ever really fit in here. Down in the chamber, the day's discussion was about a problem between 2 species. The crystal beings, called Zephyrians, needed to mine special rocks from asteroids near a star called Vega. But the gas people, the Nethori, also claimed those same asteroids. It was the kind of dispute that could start a war if handled badly. A Zephyrian delegate activated its translator. The machine hummed softly, then spoke in a calm computer voice. This delegation respectfully requests consideration of mineral extraction rights in the Vega system, with full acknowledgement of all stakeholder concerns and environmental impact assessments. Daeho frowned. What the crystal being really meant was probably something like, "We need those rocks or our people will die." But the translator had turned it into boring committee speak that said almost nothing. A Nethori delegate responded through its own translator. The Nethori Collective appreciates the Zephyrian position and suggests establishing a joint committee to study all possible options, while ensuring respect for traditional usage patterns and spiritual considerations. Again, the real message was hidden. Daeho guessed the gas people were probably saying, "Those asteroids are important to us, so back off." But the translator made it sound like they were open to discussion when they clearly were not. This went on for hours. Delegate after delegate stood up and spoke through their machines using hundreds of words to say very little. Daeho could see that both sides were getting frustrated, but their translators kept filtering out all emotion, all urgency, all real meaning. He looked around at the other aliens. Many of them had features that suggested they were feeling stressed or angry. The Velthari delegate's skin was changing colors in rapid flashes. A bird-like creature from the Altair system was ruffling its feathers in what looked like irritation. Even the tree people were rustling their leaves in agitation, but none of that emotion made it through their translators. Every message came out as polite, meaningless, diplomatic talk. "This is insane," Deho muttered under his breath. Several nearby delegates turned to stare at him again. One of them, a tall blue alien with 4 arms, activated its translator. "The Velthari delegation formally requests that the human representative observe proper council decorum and refrain from unauthorized vocalizations." Deho felt his face get hot. He was being scolded like a child in school for talking in class. But these were supposed to be adults discussing serious problems that affected billions of lives. How could they get anything done if they could not even speak honestly? The debate continued into the evening with no progress. The Zephyrians and Nethori were no closer to solving their problem than when they started. If anything, the careful, filtered communication was making things worse by hiding what each side really wanted. As the session finally ended, Deho stood up and stretched. His movement caused another wave of disapproving looks from nearby aliens. Captain Park Minji came down from the observation deck to escort him back to their quarters. "How did it go?" she asked as they walked through the corridors of the massive space station. "Terrible," Deho replied. "They spent 8 hours talking and said absolutely nothing. The crystal people are dying and need those minerals, but they cannot just say that. The gas people think the asteroids are sacred, but they will not admit it because it might sound primitive. So instead they dance around the truth with fancy words that mean nothing." Minji nodded. She had watched the whole thing and felt the same frustration. "The other delegates are filing complaints about your behavior. They think humans are too emotional and unpredictable." "Maybe we are," Deho said, "but at least we say what we mean." Neither of them knew that this simple difference would soon change everything in the galaxy. The ability to speak directly, to say uncomfortable truths, to cut through polite lies, these were things that other species had forgotten how to do. And soon, the entire Galactic Council would learn why that was a problem. 3 days had passed since the first meeting, and nothing had changed. Ambassador Lee Deho sat in his assigned seat, watching the same pointless dance of words that had been going on for 72 hours straight. The Zephyrians and Nethori were still arguing about the asteroids near Vega, but they were not really arguing. They were being polite to death. The crystal beings would stand up and speak through their translator. "We humbly request the Council's wisdom in facilitating a mutually beneficial resource allocation framework that addresses our urgent metabolic requirements while respecting all cultural sensitivities." Then the gas people would respond, "The Nethori Collective values the Zephyrian perspective and proposes extensive consultation periods to ensure comprehensive understanding of all stakeholder positions before any preliminary decisions are considered." Deho wanted to scream. He knew what was really happening. The Zephyrians were running out of a mineral they needed to survive. Without it, their homeworld would start losing the energy that kept their whole civilization alive. Billions of crystal. People would slowly fade away and die. But they could not just say, "We are dying, please help us," because that might sound too emotional for the Council. The Nethori had their own problem. Those asteroids were not just rocks to them. They were burial grounds where their ancestors had been scattered after death. Mining them would be like digging up a cemetery, but they could not say, "Those are our graveyards. Leave them alone." because that might sound too primitive or religious for a scientific council. So instead, both sides spoke in circles, using big words that meant nothing, while time ran out for everyone. Captain Park Minji watched from the observation deck, feeling more worried with each passing hour. She had received several formal complaints about human behavior. The other species did not like how Daeho moved around, made noise, or showed emotions on his face. They wanted him to sit perfectly still and speak only through the translation, machines like everyone else. Security Chief Kim Jinho had joined her to discuss the situation. The Velthari delegation is threatening to call for our removal if Daeho does not control himself, he said quietly. They think human emotions might be contagious. Minji almost laughed at that, but she knew it was serious. These aliens really did think that showing feelings was dangerous. They had built their whole civilization around hiding what they really thought and felt. Down in the chamber, another Zephyrian delegate was speaking. Our preliminary analysis suggests that certain mineral extraction opportunities in the Vega sector could potentially align with broader galactic resource optimization strategies, pending appropriate environmental and cultural impact assessments. Daeho gripped his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. What the crystal being meant was simple. Our people are dying, and those rocks could save them. Why could they not just say that? A Nethori delegate floated forward in its container. The collective acknowledges the importance of resource security for all council members and suggests forming a subcommittee to explore alternative solutions that might address Zephyrian needs while preserving the traditional significance of the Vega asteroid field. Translation: find your minerals somewhere else because those rocks are important to us. Again, a simple message buried under layers of diplomatic nonsense. This went on for another 4 hours. Committee formation proposals. Environmental impact. Studies. Cultural sensitivity reviews. Preliminary assessments of preliminary assessments. All while the Zephyrian homeworld grew dimmer, and the Nethori grew more desperate to protect their sacred sites. Finally, Daeho could not take it anymore. He stood up without using his translator. His voice rang out clear and loud in the silent chamber. This is ridiculous. Every alien in the room turned to stare at him. Some of them started making alarm sounds. Others began backing away as if he had pulled out a weapon. The Zephyrians are dying, Daeho shouted, pointing at the crystal. Delegates. They need those minerals to save billions of lives, but they cannot say so because you people think honesty is rude. The Zephyrian delegates began glowing brighter, their crystal bodies flashing with what looked like surprise or fear. And you, Daeho turned to the Nethori. Those asteroids are your graveyards. You worship your ancestors there, but you will not say so because it sounds primitive to everyone else. The purple gas in the Nethori containers began swirling faster, creating small storms inside their transparent homes. Just say what you mean, Daeho yelled to the whole chamber. Stop hiding behind your machines and speak like real people. The Zephyrians need help. The Nethori want to protect something sacred, so figure out how to do both. The chamber erupted in chaos. Alarms started blaring from every translator station. Red lights flashed on the walls. Half the delegates began rushing toward the exits while others activated emergency containment fields around their seats. Security Chief Kim Jinho came running down from the observation deck with a team of guards. Sir, you need to come with us right now, he said, trying to grab Daeho's arm. But Daeho was not finished. You have been talking for 3 days and said nothing. Meanwhile, people are dying. Real people with real problems that need real solutions, not more committees. Captain Park Minji arrived with more security personnel. The alien delegates were in full panic mode now. Some were speaking rapidly through their translators, demanding immediate medical quarantine procedures. Others were calling for emergency council sessions to deal with the human contamination incident. "Ambassador, we have to go," Minji said firmly. "Now." As they escorted Daeho out of the chamber, he could hear the translators behind him chattering with automated messages. "Emergency protocols activated. Unfiltered communication detected. All delegates report to medical for psychological evaluation. Chamber contamination procedures in effect." Back in their quarters, Daeho paced around the room while Minji and Kim tried to figure out how much trouble they were in. "The council is calling an emergency session," Kim reported, reading messages on his communication device. "They want to suspend human participation pending a full psychological evaluation." "Psychological evaluation?" Daeho stopped pacing. "What do they think I am, crazy?" "To them, yes," said a new voice from the doorway. Elder researcher Choi Na-young entered the room looking tired and worried. She was the human delegation's expert on alien cultures, and she had been studying council records since the incident. "I have been reading their historical files," she continued. "Most of these species evolved as prey animals. Their ancestors survived by being quiet, careful, and never saying anything that might attract attention from predators. Direct communication feels like a threat to them." "So what happens now?" Minji asked. Na-young sat down heavily in a chair. "Now they decide whether to kick humanity out of the galaxy forever. They think our honesty might destroy their civilization." Daeho looked out the window at the stars beyond the station. Somewhere out there, crystal people were dying because no one could find a way to speak honestly about simple problems. Gas people were suffering because they could not protect what they loved without seeming backward. "Maybe," he said quietly, "their civilization needs to be destroyed. Maybe something better could take its place." None of them knew that across the galaxy, other humans were starting to have the same thought. Dr. Song Hyun-woo arrived at the space station 3 days after what the council was calling the contamination incident. He was humanity's best expert on alien psychology, and right now he was their only hope of staying in the galactic community. The council had given him 1 week to prove that humans were not dangerous to other species. He met with elder researcher Choi Na-young in the human delegation's main office. She had been working without sleep, reading through thousands of files about alien cultures and council history. Her desk was covered with data tablets and empty coffee cups. "What have you found?" Dr. Song asked, sitting down across from her. "Something interesting," Na-young said, pulling up a holographic display. "Look at this. Every species in the council evolved as either prey animals, hive minds, or ambush predators. Prey animals learn to be quiet and careful. Hive minds think as one group, so they never disagree. Ambush predators learn to hide their thoughts until the perfect moment to strike." Dr. Song studied the data floating in the air between them. "And humans?" "We are the only persistence hunters in the galaxy," Na-young said. "Our ancestors chased animals for hours or days until they collapsed from exhaustion. We learned to work in small groups, communicate constantly, and never give up. Most importantly, we learned to be honest with each other because lies could get everyone killed during a long hunt." Dr. Song began to understand. "So when Ambassador Daeho spoke directly about the problem, it triggered their survival instincts." "Exactly. To them, anyone who speaks that honestly must be a predator preparing to attack." Meanwhile, Ambassador Lee Daeho was sitting in a medical observation room, answering questions from alien doctors. The questions were all filtered through, translators, of course, but he could tell the doctors were afraid of him. "Please describe your emotional state during the incident," came the mechanical voice from the translation device. "I was frustrated," Deho answered honestly. Two groups needed help, but they could not ask for it directly. People were going to die while everyone played word games. The doctor's translator was quiet for a long time. Then, "Do you feel remorse for causing psychological distress to other delegates?" "I feel bad that they were upset," Deho said. "But I do not feel bad for telling the truth. The truth needed to be said." More silence. The alien doctors were clearly confused by his answers. In their world, causing distress to others was the worst possible crime. But Deho genuinely believed that sometimes short-term distress was better than long-term suffering. Captain Park Minji was having her own investigations in the station's security center. She had been given access to historical records about Galactic conflicts, and what she found made her angry. Communications Officer Bei Jiho worked beside her, pulling up file after file of old disputes. "Look at this one," he said, pointing to a record on his screen. "The Andromedan War. It lasted 200 years and killed billions of people." "What started it?" Minji asked. "The Andromedans were mining on some asteroids. The Pleiadians thought those asteroids were sacred burial grounds, but instead of just saying so, they filed formal complaints through the council. The Andromedans thought the complaints were about mining rights, not religion. By the time anyone figured out the real problem, both sides had built up huge armies and were too proud to back down." Minji stared at the screen. 200 years. Of war because no one could say those rocks are our graveyard? "It gets worse," Bay said, opening another file. "The Centauri plague. Millions died because the Centaurians were too polite to tell their trading partners that they were carrying a disease. They thought it would be rude to suggest that their partners might get sick." File after file showed the same pattern. Problems that could have been solved with honest conversation instead became massive disasters because everyone was too afraid to speak directly. Back in the research office, Dr. Song was conducting his own experiment. He had convinced elder researcher Na Young to help him test something with Ambassador Deho. They brought in a Zephyrian delegate and a Nethori representative, both volunteers who were curious about human psychology. Dr. Song asked them to discuss the Vega asteroid problem, but this time without their translation filters. At first, both aliens were terrified. The Zephyrian's crystal body flickered with nervous energy. The Nethori's gas swirled in tight, anxious patterns. "Just say what you really think," Deho encouraged them. "What do you actually need?" The Zephyrian spoke first, its voice like wind. "Chimes. Our homeworld's core is cooling. Without the energy minerals from Vega, our civilization will fade within 50 years. Billions of our people will die slowly as our cities go dark." The Nethori's voice was like a whispered breeze. "Those asteroids contain the scattered remains of our ancestors. For 10,000 years we have honored them there. To mine those rocks would be like desecrating every cemetery on our homeworld." Dr. Song watched in amazement. In 30 seconds, both species had said more truth than their translators had managed. In 3 days of meetings. "Okay," Deho said calmly. "So you need energy minerals, and you need to protect your ancestors? Can we find a way to do both?" The Zephyrian's light pulsed thoughtfully. "What if we could mine around the burial sites? Take only the rocks that do not contain remains." The Nethori's gas brightened. "Our sensors can detect where our ancestors rest. We could guide your mining to avoid those areas. And maybe," the Zephyrian added. We could help you build memorial structures on the asteroids. Monuments that would honor your ancestors while protecting the mining sites. The Nathori spun faster with excitement. Yes! Sacred monuments powered by the same energy that saves your people. Our ancestors would like that. Their resting place helping to preserve life. Dr. Song and Na Yung looked at each other in amazement. The two species had just solved their problem in less than 10 minutes of honest conversation. It was a solution that would have been impossible to reach through the filtered, polite communication of the council, but as they celebrated this small success, none of them knew about the emergency session happening in the highest levels of the council. Ancient records were being opened, files that had been sealed for thousands of years. The council leaders were reading about the last time a species had spoken freely in the chambers. They were reading about the Speakers, a race that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization with their terrible honesty. The Speakers had used truth as a weapon, driving other species to madness and war with their brutal words. The question now was simple. Were humans another version of the Speakers? Were they the same kind of monster that had once brought the galaxy to its knees? The Council would have to decide soon. And if they decided that humans were too dangerous, the entire human race would be exiled from the stars forever. Dr. Song's test had proven that humans could help solve problems with their directness, but it had also proven something else. That human honesty was indeed a powerful force that could change everything. The only question was whether that change would save the galaxy or destroy it. Dr. Song Hyun-woo stood before the closed council session with his heart pounding. Around him sat the most powerful beings in the galaxy, all hidden behind their translation filters and ceremonial masks. Today would decide the fate of humanity among the stars. He activated his presentation device, and holographic displays filled the air above the chamber. Honored delegates, I have spent the past week studying the communication patterns of our species. What I found will surprise you. The first image showed brain scans of different alien species. Every species in this council evolved from creatures that survived by being quiet, careful, and avoiding conflict. Prey animals, hive minds, ambush predators, all of them learned that direct communication was dangerous. A murmur went through the chamber as the translators processed this information. Dr. Song could see several delegates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But humans evolved differently, he continued. We were persistence hunters. Our ancestors survived by working together, communicating constantly, and never giving up. We learned that honesty kept us alive. He showed video recordings of his experiment with the Zephyrian and Nathori delegates. The chamber fell completely silent as they watched two species solve their ancient dispute in minutes through direct conversation. The silence protocol was designed to prevent wars, Dr. Song said, but it has actually caused more suffering by making real communication impossible. Elder researcher Choi Na-young joined him at the speaking platform. She activated her own displays, showing thousands of years of galactic history. Look at these conflicts, she said. The Andromedan War, 200 years of fighting because no one could say the word cemetery. The Centauri Plague, millions dead because it was rude to mention disease. The Rigel trade disputes, economic collapse because nobody could admit they were going bankrupt. File after file showed the same pattern. Problems that should have taken days to solve instead became centuries-long disasters because the truth was too uncomfortable to speak. Captain Park Minji stood up in the observation area. Permission to speak, honored delegates. The Council's Supreme Arbiter, an ancient being called Velthos, nodded slowly. Minji activated her presentation, showing security footage from across the galaxy. "These are private communications from your own species," she said, "recorded when you thought no one was listening." The first recording showed Zephyrian delegates, in their private quarters, speaking in urgent, emotional tones about their dying homeworld. The second showed Nathori leaders expressing desperate fear about losing their sacred sites. A third recording captured Velthari diplomats angrily discussing trade disputes they were too polite to mention in public. "You all know how to speak directly," Minji said. "You do it in private every day. The silence protocol forces you to be artificial in public, hiding what you really think and feel." The chamber erupted in uncomfortable shifting and quiet alarm sounds. The delegates were shocked to see their private conversations displayed so openly. Ambassador Lee Daeho was given permission to speak next. He walked to the center of the chamber without any translation device, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "I know you are afraid of me," he said simply. "You think humans are dangerous because we say what we mean. But look around, this chamber. Look at all the problems you cannot solve because you are too polite to name them." He pointed to different sections of the chamber. "The Altarian trade crisis, happening because nobody wants to admit that your currency is worthless. The Procyon medical emergency, getting worse because it is rude to say that your doctors do not know what they are doing. The serious territorial dispute, dragging on for decades because both sides are too proud to admit they just want respect." Several delegates began making distressed sounds, but Daeho continued. "I am not trying to hurt you by saying these things. I am trying to help. Sometimes the truth hurts, but lies hurt more." Dr. Song activated his final presentation. "The key difference between humans and other species is not just that we speak directly. It is that we care about the people we are speaking to. We use honesty to help, not to harm." But as the presentation ended, Supreme Arbiter Velthos raised a skeletal hand for silence. The ancient being's translator spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "Dr. Song, your analysis is incomplete. You have not addressed the historical precedent." The chamber's lights dimmed, and new holographic displays appeared. These showed records from 10,000 years ago, files that had been sealed since the founding of the current galactic civilization. "Long ago," Velthos continued, "there was another species that spoke freely. They were called the Speakers. They used truth as a weapon, driving entire civilizations to madness and suicide with their brutal honesty. The displays showed images of worlds in flames, species fleeing into deep space, entire sectors of the galaxy left empty and lifeless. The Speakers would tell a hive mind that their unity was weakness. They would tell prey species that their caution made them cowards. They would tell predator species that their hunting instincts made them monsters." The chamber fell into terrified silence as the full scope of the ancient disaster became clear. "The Speakers nearly destroyed galactic civilization," Velthos said. "They turned every species against itself by speaking truths that should never be spoken. The silence protocol was created to ensure that such monsters could never arise again." Dr. Song felt his hopes crashing down around him. How could he prove that humans were different from these ancient destroyers? But then Communications Officer Bei Jiho stood up in the observation area. "Permission to address the council," he said. Velthos nodded, clearly curious about what this young human would say. Bei activated his communication device and began playing audio recordings. These are conversations between humans discussing other species, private conversations recorded over the past week. The first recording was Dr. Song talking to Na Yung. The Zephyrians are dying, but they are too proud to beg for help. We need to find a way to let them ask, without losing face. The second was Daeho speaking to Minji. The Nithori are not being stubborn about those asteroids. They are protecting something sacred. We need to respect that while finding a solution. A third recording showed Captain Park discussing security concerns. The other species are afraid of us because their evolution taught them to fear direct communication. We need to be patient and gentle while we prove we are not threats. You hear the difference? Bay asked the chamber. The speakers use truth to destroy. Humans use truth to heal. When we speak honestly about your problems, we do it because we want to help you solve them. Supreme Arbiter. Velthos was quiet for a long time. Finally, the ancient being spoke. You propose that humans could serve as mediators, using their direct communication to help solve disputes that our protocol cannot address. Yes, Dr. Song said, but only when invited, and only with the goal of helping rather than harming. We would take on the responsibility of speaking difficult truths that need to be heard. The chamber fell silent as thousands of delegates considered this proposal. Could they trust these strange persistence hunters with the power to speak freely? Could they risk another disaster like the one caused by the speakers? The vote would determine not just humanity's future in the galaxy, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The debate lasted for 18 hours. Delegates argued through their translators in the careful, filtered language that had governed galactic politics for thousands of years. But underneath the polite words, Ambassador Lee Daeho could sense the real emotions: fear, hope, desperation, and anger all mixed together. Some species wanted to exile humanity immediately. The Velthari delegate spoke for many when its translator said, "The risk of another speaker catastrophe outweighs any potential benefits. We cannot allow unfiltered communication to return to the galaxy." But other species had been listening to the recordings of solved disputes. A Rigelian delegate stood up. "Our trade negotiations have been stalled for 12 years. Perhaps honest mediation could help where diplomacy has failed." Dr. Song Hyun Woo sat in the observation area with the rest of the human delegation, watching the careful dance of words below. Elder researcher Choi Na-young had been working all night, analyzing the ancient records about the speakers. What she found was troubling. The speakers were not just direct communicators. She whispered to Dr. Song. They were sadists. They enjoyed causing pain with their words. They would tell species exactly what would hurt them most, not what would help them most. Captain Park Minji leaned closer. How do we prove that humans are different? Before anyone could answer, Supreme Arbiter Velthos called for order. The ancient being's translator spoke with grinding authority. "We will conduct a final test. Ambassador Daeho will address this chamber directly, speaking to our fears and weaknesses without filters. If he uses this power to help, rather than harm, humanity will be granted limited speaking privileges. If he uses it to wound, humanity will be exiled forever." Daeho felt his stomach drop. He was being asked to walk into a room full of frightened aliens and tell them their deepest flaws. One wrong word could doom his entire species. He walked to the center of the chamber, feeling thousands of alien eyes watching him. The silence was so complete, he could hear his own heartbeat. "I see your fears," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Velthari delegates, you are afraid that your people are becoming weak because you have not fought a war in centuries. You think peace has made you soft. The Velthari delegates began glowing with agitation, but Daiho continued gently. But peace is not weakness. It is the greatest strength. Your people have learned to solve problems without violence. That makes you more evolved, not less. He turned to another section. Zephyrian Collective, you fear that asking for help makes you look pathetic. Your crystal ancestors conquered star systems through strength alone, and now you feel shame for needing others. The Zephyrian delegates flickered with embarrassment, but Daiho's voice remained kind. Asking for help when you need it is not weakness. It is wisdom. The strongest civilizations are those that know when to work together. Nithori Cloud Minds, you are afraid that your spiritual beliefs make you seem primitive to the scientific species. You hide your religion because you think it makes you look backward. The purple gas in the Nithori containers swirled with nervous energy, but Daiho smiled. Your connection to your ancestors gives you something most species have lost, a sense of meaning beyond just survival. That is not primitive. That is precious. He moved through the chamber, addressing each species' deepest insecurities with honest but gentle words. The hive minds who feared individual thought. The prey species who thought their caution made them cowards. The predator species who felt guilty about their hunting instincts. To each group he spoke their fears aloud, but then offered them a new way to see themselves. He showed them how their perceived weaknesses were actually hidden strengths, all. Of you are afraid that direct communication will destroy your civilization, Daiho said finally, standing in the center of the chamber. You think honesty is dangerous because the speakers once used it as a weapon. But the speakers forgot something important. Truth without compassion is just cruelty. He looked around at the thousands of delegates. We humans learned something different during our evolution. We learned that sometimes you have to tell people difficult truths to help them survive. But you tell those truths with love, not with hate. The chamber was completely silent. Many delegates were showing signs of emotion that their translators would normally filter out. Velthari skin patterns were shifting in what looked like relief. Zephyrian crystals were glowing with hope. Nithori gas clouds were brightening with what might have been joy. Supreme Arbiter Velthos stood slowly, the ancient being's movements careful and deliberate. Ambassador Daiho, you have spoken our fears aloud, but instead of using them to wound us, you have used them to heal us. This is indeed different from the speakers. The translator's mechanical voice continued. The Council recognizes that direct communication, guided by compassion rather than cruelty, could benefit our civilization. Therefore, we grant humanity special dispensation to speak freely within council chambers. A wave of surprised sounds went through the gathering. This was unprecedented in galactic history. However, Velthos continued, this privilege comes with enormous responsibility. Humans will serve as truth speakers for the Council, helping to resolve disputes that the Silence Protocol cannot address. But this power must only be used to help, never to harm. Communications Officer Bei Jiho stood up in the observation area. We accept this responsibility, he said formally. Humanity will use honest communication to build bridges, not to burn them. As the session ended, delegates began approaching the human section with requests. The Rigelian trade dispute that had lasted 12 years. The Altarian medical crisis that was getting worse every day. The serious territorial argument that had poisoned relations between two species for decades. All of them wanted human mediators to cut through the polite lies and find real solutions. Captain Park Minji watched the scene with amazement. A week ago, they wanted to throw us out of the galaxy. Now they are asking for our help. Dr. Song smiled. They have been drowning in politeness for thousands of years. We just threw them a rope made of honesty. Elder researcher Choi Na-young was already making plans. We will need to train more humans as mediators, and we will need strict ethical guidelines to make sure we never become like the speakers. Ambassador Lee Dae-ho stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by alien delegates who were finally able to speak about their real problems. A Zephyrian asked directly for mining rights to save their homeworld. A Nethori offered to help guide the mining around sacred sites. A Velthari suggested building a memorial that would honor both species. Simple, honest conversation was solving problems that had seemed impossible just days before. As the chamber slowly emptied, Dae-ho looked up at the observation deck where his fellow humans were watching. They had become something unique in galactic history, a species authorized to speak freely in a civilization built on careful silence. It was a huge responsibility. But as he watched aliens from different species talking to each other directly for the first time in their lives, he knew it was worth it. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had always known, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is tell someone the truth they need to hear, even when it hurts, and sometimes that truth can change everything.